Hello and welcome to the September edition of Hull History Centre's Stories from the Strongrooms. If it's your first visit to our Strongroom talks, welcome. Please remember to subscribe to our channel by clicking the bell icon so that you are notified every time we upload a new video. It will be 83 years on the 3rd of September since war was declared with Germany. And this month we take a look at some of the records held at the centre which detail the work carried out by the men and women of Hull's Civil Defence Service during the conflict. As many are aware, despite being the heaviest bombed city for its size in the country, Hull was rarely referred to by name during the Second World War. Instead, reports of raids were said to have taken place in a northeast coast town in an attempt to protect the identity of the city. Because of this, attacks on Hull have often been overlooked and the large part played by what has been termed the civilian fourth arm of defence ignored. The Home Office established the Civil Defence Service in 1935, but the responsibility for its organisation was left to local authorities. Hull's civil defence was the responsibility of the Emergency Committee and was coordinated by the ARP, short for Air Raid Precautions, Controller, Councillor Leonard Spite. Alderman Leonard Schultz, who also served as Lord Mayor 1942 to 1943, was appointed his deputy, and Mr. Robert G. Tarrant offered his services in the honorary position of Chief Air Raid Warden. Between them, they were responsible for the services we are going to look at today. These are Control and Report, Wardens, First Aid and Ambulance, Gas Decontamination Teams, Fire Watchers, Cyclist Messengers, and the Rescue Parties. Recruitment exercises started early in 1939 and carried on through the spring and summer. By the end of August 1939, 3,622 men and women had enrolled in the services, and by the time war was declared on the 3rd of September, 2,620 personnel were fully trained and allocated to a district ready for duty. The rest were in the course of training. The service split the city into 4 divisions comprising 29 districts, each division and district having a headquarters. Each district was then subdivided into sectors with a total of 750 sectors across the city, with all lines leading from and to the control centre. Each unit within the Warden service was able to operate independently in case communication links with other districts were lost, and wardens at every level were therefore trained for such an eventuality, many having to put their training into practice during the war years. A central headquarters housing senior administrative and training staff was based at Shelmex House on Ferrens Way until the 31st of March 1941, when a raid completely destroyed the building. The service relocated to a number of temporary venues before moving to premises in Queen's Gardens in February 1942. The control centre was the nerve centre of all local ARP operations. A situation map recorded all bombing incidents, which allowed staff to watch over any developing situation and transfer services from one area to another as required. In addition, there were 4 report centres around the city. Northwest at University College, Southwest at Gordon Street Police Station, Central at Central Police Station, and Eastern at Crowell Street Police Station. The staff within the control room consisted of the controller and the chief operations officer, who directed operations, 2 assistant operations officers, 1 reporting unexploded bombs and 1 who provided divisional assistance, 3 map plotters, 2 plotting the positions of aircrafts and 1 plotting incidents, 6 telephonists each having their own responsibilities, a filing clerk filing incidents, a messenger running between control and WVS, a WVS representative dealing with reception centres and care of the homeless matters, and 4 motorcyclist messengers. The adjacent services room consisted of representatives of utility services and a number of personnel concerned with first aid and medical provision. The Warden's main role was to report incidents relating to raids and give assistance until other services arrived, but in reality they did much more. They were probably the most visible of all the services as they came to know and developed a relationship with the people of the areas they were responsible for. One of the first duties undertaken by wardens, which helped them to develop this valuable relationship, was a census of the residents of the city. Initially, this was for the issue of respirators, but it soon developed into a full record of every resident of the city and became known as the civilian census, recorded on a family record card. As well as details of each family, it also contained information such as who the family could stay with in an emergency. The warden was invariably the first official on the scene after a bombing raid, and as can be seen from this flowchart, their responsibilities were wide and far-reaching. Once a raid was declared, they remained at their post until relevant services had arrived, everyone was accounted for, those in need sent to reception centres, and reports written. Due to the relationship wardens had with those in their areas, they often felt a deep responsibility for them, and there are many reports of wardens determined to find missing persons and continuing to search for them long after incidents had been officially closed. It would appear that lady head wardens and women wardens, as they are described in this document, had distinctive roles of their own, mainly relating to the needs of pregnant women, babies, and the elderly. As the war progressed, these roles would have complemented those undertaken by the Women's Voluntary Services, or the WVS as they were more commonly known. Their work was vast and varied, ranging from the preparation of reception centres for use after raids, the administration of the blood transfusion service, and providing emergency cooking and make do and mend demonstrations and classes. At the start of the war, it was hoped that responsibility for first aid would be fulfilled by the St John's Ambulance Brigade. However, it quickly became apparent that they were unable to adequately staff the service, resulting in a recruitment campaign to attract volunteers. Between December 1940 and June 1941, 2,456 volunteers successfully obtained their certificate in first aid from the St John's Ambulance Association. On every alert, the Medical Officer of Health or the Deputy Medical Officer of Health attended at the control centre, whilst doctors from the Public Health Department attended at the local report centres and often went out to help at incidents. Stationed at first aid depots, a first aid party usually consisted of 5 men who were ferried to the scene of an incident by car or ambulance, usually by a female driver from the ambulance service. They would render immediate first aid to the injured and endeavour to remove them to safety and further treatment if necessary as soon as possible. At the start of 1941, there were 21 first aid depots, but 3 were destroyed in one night of the May Blitz. Another depot in Garden Village was ready to open when it was completely destroyed, and its replacement in Morrill Street only lasted 3 weeks before it too was destroyed. Experiences of gas attacks during the First World War had led the authorities to fear that poison gas would be unleashed on the civilian population once war was declared. In view of this, decontamination became one of the ARP essential services. Everyone, including children and babies, were issued with gas masks, and training exercises were carried out to protect the public from such an attack. It was anticipated that most people exposed to blister gas could carry out the recommended process of removing their clothing and thoroughly washing their bodies with soap and water at home. Further help was also provided via cleansing stations operated by the Casualty Service set up at first aid posts across the city, where it was estimated they could deal with a total of 3,225 cases per hour. There were special cleansing centres at 51 Market Place, Paragon Station and Madeley Street Baths, and 8 mobile cleansing units with a capacity to deal with a total of 1,200 cases per hour. Thankfully, as we know, none of these services were ever called upon. Fire prevention duties were carried out by wardens known as fire watchers or spotters, who had received intensive training in incendiary bomb control and were prepared to deal with fire bombs. As the war progressed, the need for fireguard wardens increased, and the chief warden opened a fireguard training school at which people from business and government premises were trained. It was not a popular job, as you could spend as many as 72 hours a week stood out in the cold, just watching and waiting. It was considered the duty of anyone between the ages of 16 and 60 to take turns at fire watching, and the corporation created a pool of their own workers known as the town pool to protect their buildings. However, if you were already involved in civil defence, you could claim exemption from fire watching, and this of course reduced the numbers available to carry out this unpopular duty. Vital in maintaining communication links between services when all other means failed, the cyclist messengers were generally youths, men and women of pre-caller age between 16 and 18. Initially, Boy Scouts were attached to district headquarters on an ad hoc basis to provide support as messengers when required. However, the government soon decreed that no one under the age of 16 should be employed on ARP service, and despite repeated requests to the regional commissioner, permission was not granted to employ messengers for the air raid warden service or to recruit volunteers under the age of 16. However, personnel cards for Hull cyclist messengers revealed that some of the messengers were as young as 15, despite government regulations. Local cyclist organisations came to the rescue, and by April 1940, 145 messengers had enrolled, and the Cyclist Messengers Corps was in a position to start training. Managed by Honorary Commandant Alderman Frederick Holmes, the constitution of the Hull ARP Messenger Service Corps laid down the name of the service, the titles of officers, the equipment allowance, and whose control the messengers came under. In this regard, they came under the control of the ARP Cyclist Messenger Corps for administrative purposes, but once on duty, after an alert, they reported to the head of whichever service they had been allocated to. Over 2,000 individuals enrolled in the service during the conflict, and many went on to serve in the armed forces. The rescue service consisted of highly trained wardens, expert in searching through the ruins of bombed buildings to find survivors. Experts in construction, demolition, and the shoring up of buildings to prevent them from collapsing, they were equipped with vans which contained all the necessary tools and equipment to aid their task. Often using their bare hands to dig out individuals, they were trained in where to search for survivors and on occasions used dogs to help. Perhaps the best way to describe the lengths of bravery that personnel went to is to relate one rescue carried out by Thomas Gale in Carden Avenue in 1943. The report for this incident reads, "On being informed that some verbal contact had just been made with trapped and buried casualties, Gale determined to tunnel towards them. After cutting through several feet of solid clay hurled up from the crater alongside, thus making an entrance, Gale continued to tunnel his way towards the sounds by removing all small debris and rubble, taking great care to leave those larger pieces of stairway, furniture, joists, etc. in situ. In this manner he constructed a tunnel which eventually covered a distance of 8 or 10 feet, and although the members of his party were all engaged in this work, Gale took the leading part because so many of his party were newly directed volunteers with no previous air raid experience. The work involved was eventually rewarded by locating a Mrs. Venn and one of her children crushed together in a very confined space, and in such a way that they could make no move of their own. After cutting away the final obstructions, Gale was able to bring out both these people, who fortunately were little the worse physically, but badly shocked. Gale then discovered another child trapped in a particularly awkward corner of the collapsed meter cupboard. He crawled inside the tunnel and hand-picked small rubble, and by gently manoeuvring withdrew the child from her position. As he was unable to turn in the narrow tunnel, Gale asked his men to draw him out by his feet whilst he kept hold of the child. This, however, proved to be unsuccessful, and Gale was left to wriggle out very gently, feet first, making very slow progress. The third casualty was handed over to the first aid party, almost uninjured. For this act of bravery, Thomas Richard Gale was awarded the British Empire Medal. Perhaps it is fitting to end our tribute with this leaflet praising the courage and devotion to duty of all the ARP services after the Blitz nights in May 1941. There is no doubt that without the courage and bravery of the men and women of what came to be considered as the fourth arm of defence, the city and its citizens would have fared much worse during one of its darkest periods in history. We owe them all a great debt of gratitude.